Hi everyone. So after a small gap, I am coming with my second topic, dorsal digital expansion. So dorsal digital expansion, as we know, it's a very small topic, but most of the time students tend to skip this topic because of lack of much understanding. This is a very important topic, so I thought we'll discuss this topic and understand the topic better. Okay. So dorsal digital expansion. Before beginning with the topic, we'll start with a few questions as we have seen in the last session. The questions I am putting forward. Okay, the first question: which is the muscle which is inserting via this dorsal digital expansion? Which muscle is inserting via dorsal digital expansion? Try to answer. Second question: what do you mean by wing tendons, and what is the difference between proximal and distal wing tendons? Coming to the next question: what is the difference between central and collateral slips regarding this dorsal digital expansion? Coming to the next question, just say whether this statement is true or false. Lumbrical muscle is attached to the medial aspect of dorsal digital expansion. Okay, say whether it is true or false. Next question: what is claw hand? What do you mean by claw hand? Claw hand, we know it's nothing but the hyperextension of metacarpophalangeal joint, and there will be hyperflexion at the level of interphalangeal joints. So what do you mean by complete claw hand, and what is the relation of this claw hand to our today's topic, that is dorsal digital expansion? Okay, and lastly, what is the composition of dorsal digital expansion in case of the middle finger? The middle finger dorsal digital expansion, what is the composition, which muscles are attached, etc. Okay, so please try to answer these questions. So by the end of the session, we will be able to answer the questions because you will understand better. Okay, so we will begin the topic, dorsal digital expansion. So as I have already mentioned, claw hand, I have already mentioned what is claw hand, we know. So these are the following topics we are going to cover in this section. First we will deal with the extensor digitorum. So a word about extensor digitorum muscle is needed for the thorough understanding of this topic. So where do you see this extensor digitorum muscle? It is a muscle of the forearm, posterior compartment of the forearm, extensor digitorum. Okay, into this extensor digitorum, we know the extensor digitorum muscle have got 4 flat long tendons, extensor digitorum. So these tendons are coming. So okay, so the diagram which I have drawn is the dorsum of hand. So correctly say, I can say it's the dorsum of the right hand. So we know this is the thumb. So this is the lateral aspect. Here comes the medial aspect. So what happens is that, so the extensor digitorum tendon, because the 4 tendons of the extensor digitorum tendon is coming, and this muscle, this extensor digitorum is inserting via this dorsal digital expansion. It is inserted. Okay. Now speaking about this muscle, we know there are to this medial 4 fingers. These 4 tendons are coming to this medial 4 fingers, and in case of this index finger and little finger, index finger and little finger, 2 additional tendons are attaching to this extensor digitorum tendon. These are extensus and extensor digiti minimi. Both these tendons are joining this extensor digitorum tendon at the medial aspect. So just keep in mind that extensor indicis and extensor digiti minimi, both these tendons are joining the extensor digitorum tendon. Okay, now coming to generalized idea of the functions of the muscles seen here. So the extensor digitorum muscle, the main function of this is nothing but extension. As the name indicates, it is extension of which all joints? Of all the joints here. That means metacarpophalangeal joint, proximal interphalangeal joint and distal interphalangeal joint. So extension at the level of all these joints is the function of extensor digitorum muscle. But don't think that only extensor digitorum is involved in the extension. Two other muscles known as lumbricals and interosseous are also involved in the extension of which joint? At the extension of which joint? At the level of interphalangeal joints. Okay, please keep in mind. So lumbricals and interosseous. So coming to the functions of lumbricals and interosseous, their main function is flexion at the level of metacarpophalangeal joint and extension at the level of interphalangeal joints. So you can easily remember like that. How do you call a person? By action, how do you call a person? Something like this, right? So keep this in mind. So this is the action of lumbricals and interosseous. That means flexion at the level of metacarpophalangeal joint and extension at the level of both proximal as well as distal interphalangeal joint. So this is the action of lumbricals. Just call a person and remember action of lumbricals and interosseous. Okay. Then coming to, so now I'll just along with this I'll say the aspect of claw hand. So what happens is claw hand, it's just the opposite of this. That means hyperextension at the level of metacarpophalangeal joint and flexion, hyperflexion at the level of interphalangeal. So you can see claw hand. So this is how, so now can you understand how claw hand comes? When there is paralysis of these muscles, especially the lumbricals, interosseous, there occurs complete claw hand. So majority of the muscles, of all these muscles is applied by deep branch of ulnar nerve except the first and second lumbricals. So what happens is that complete claw hand occurs in the paralysis of lumbricals and interosseous. So you can remember this after aspect as it is very important. In case of ulnar nerve injury, then other different types, I'm not going to the detail now. We'll see later. Okay. Now coming to our main topic, dorsal digital expansion. Okay. First we'll see so what is this dorsal digital expansion? It's nothing but a triangular shaped aponeurosis seen mainly over the proximal phalanx. So I have already shown this diagram. In this diagram we can see the three phalanges, that is proximal, middle and distal phalanx. And this bone, a part of the metacarpal bone also I have shown. So where do you see this dorsal digital expansion? It is seen mainly, it is a triangular aponeurosis which you may see mainly over the proximal phalanx and will be covering the and over the head of the metacarpal bone. So something like this is. Okay, something like a triangular aponeurosis with an apex and a base. So it will be mainly seen over the proximal phalanx and over the head of the metacarpal bone. All this in the dorsal aspect. Keep that in mind. This is the dorsal aspect. Okay. Now we'll see what are the different parts of this dorsal digital expansion. You can say as it is triangular in shape, it has got an apex and a base. This dorsal digital expansion will be enclosing. What is this joint? This is metacarpophalangeal joint. So it will be enclosing the metacarpophalangeal joint also. And you can see this is the base. The base is forming a hood. And this base is attached. Here there is a ligament known as deep transverse metacarpal ligament is seen over here, somewhere over here. So this base is attached to this deep transverse metacarpal ligament. Then coming to the apex. Apex, what happens is that apex is seen over the distal end of the proximal phalanx. And what happens is that apex is splitting. At the level of this distal end of proximal phalanx, it is splitting into 3. And the central one is known as the central slip. The central slip will be coming here, traversing the proximal interphalangeal joint, and finally it will be inserting into the into the base of the middle phalanx. So what I was telling is about central slip of the dorsal digital expansion. Then the other two ones, we call it as collateral slip. The two collateral slips will be coming like this. Then it will be joining together and then inserting into the base of the distal phalanx. So this is regarding the slips of dorsal digital expansion. I will explain once more. We have seen the apex and base, right? The apex is seen just close to the distal aspect of proximal phalanx. So over there it splits into 3 slips. One central slip and 2 collateral slips. The central slip traverses the proximal interphalangeal joint and finally inserts into the base of the middle phalanx. And the 2 collateral slips is passing distally like this, then joining together and finally inserting to the base of the distal phalanx. So this is regarding the slips. Now telling more about the slips, the central and collateral slips, they are they function independently. Things they say, the central slip mainly contains, as we have initially told, the extensor digitorum. So that is that tendon is the main thing. It's the insertion of extensor digitorum. Insertion of this muscle is via this dorsal digital expansion. We have already seen. So this central slip is containing nothing but this extensor digitorum tendon, the tendon of extensor digitorum muscle. While the collateral slips are containing the attachments of interosseae, lumbricals, and interosseae involved, it can be palmar or dorsal interosseae. Another difference is the central slip acts on the metacarpophalangeal joint. So the central slip is mainly, as I told, it's carrying mainly the insertion of this extensor digitorum muscle. It is acting mainly on this metacarpophalangeal joint, while the collateral slips it carries insertion of lumbricals, interosseae, and also they act on metacarpophalangeal joint as well as the interphalangeal joints. So it's completely both are independently acting, both central and collateral slips. Okay. Coming to once more, see the apex and base of dorsal digital expansion. As I've already told, the base or hood is there is an attachment of this base or hood to the proximal, what I will say is to the metacarpal bone, to the head of the metacarpal bone there is an attachment. That via fibroareolar ribbon, the base of the dorsal digital expansion, which I have already told, it is attached to the head of the metacarpal bone via fibroareolar ribbon. Just keep that in mind. Okay. Now coming to the next group of tendons, the wing tendons. What do you mean by wing tendons? Wing tendons are nothing but, as I mentioned earlier, some muscles known as lumbricals, palmar interosseae, dorsal interosseae are all attached to this dorsal digital expansion. So the point of attachment of these lumbricals, palmar interosseae, dorsal interosseae to the dorsal digital expansion, we call it as wing tendons. So we can classify them as proximal wing tendons and distal wing tendons. Okay. So just considering this, we have This is the dorsal digital expansion of the index finger, right? Okay, so I was talking about the wing tendons, proximal and distal wing tendons. So the proximal wing tendons, though they are seen proximally, so either it can be dorsal interosseous or palmar interosseous. So it can be either dorsal interosseous, palmar interosseous, and the distal wing tendon will be usually lumbrical muscles. So that is the basic difference. So one thing about lumbricals, usually always the lumbricals will be seen along the lateral aspect. So it will be attachment of the lumbrical to the lateral aspect of dorsal digital expansion. Regarding the dorsal and palmar interosseous, it can be either medial or dorsal, but anyway, interosseous means it will be proximal. It will be considered along with the proximal wing tendons. Okay. Now another major difference between proximal and distal wing tendon. Proximal wing tendon involving the interosseous, it will. Okay. Considering the difference of proximal and distal wing tendons, the proximal wing tendons, as I have told, it's mainly involved the palmar and dorsal interosseous, and it is seen more proximally. So I can see as I mark, it will seen more proximally, and that will be close to the metacarpophalangeal joint. But on the contrary, the distal wing tendons involving the lumbricals, as you can see, this is the distal wing tendon. It is seen more close to the proximal interphalangeal joint. So that is one major difference. Then this proximal wing tendon, it will be usually, these tendons will be running dorsal to the deep transverse comment, but the lumbrical tendon will be ventral to the deep transverse metacarpal ligament. That is another major difference. Proximal wing tendons, it has got attachment to the base of the proximal phalanx. There is an attachment. On the contrary, the distal wing tendons, there is no attachment at all to the proximal. So these are some three basic differences. One small little bit. Proximal wing tendon involves the interosseous, distal wing tendons involve the lumbrical. Then the attachment of the proximal phalanx, the difference, and the relation to the joint, one to the metacarpophalangeal, the other to the proximal interphalangeal joint. So that is about the wing tendons. Coming to the composition. So what is the composition of this dorsal digital expansion? You know, total there are 4 dorsal digital expansions for the index finger, middle finger, ring finger and little finger. So in each, the composition will be different in each of these. Just I have drawn in this board just for a basic idea. In case of index finger, so first we'll be starting with the index finger. Index finger, the attachment, lumbrical muscle, the first lumbrical muscle is the seen in case of index finger. Then the palmar interosseous, the second palmar interosseous. We know there are 4 palmar interosseous. In that, the second palmar interosseous attachment will be to the index finger. In case of dorsal interosseous, the first dorsal interosseous is attached. So like that, it will be varying for each dorsal digital expansion. In case of middle finger, the second lumbrical muscle, there will be no attachment of any palmar interosseous. We know in the metacarpal, middle metacarpal, third metacarpal bone also there is no attachment to palmar interosseous. Similarly, to the dorsal digital expansion also, the attachment of palmar interosseous will be nil. Dorsal interosseous, on the contrary, both second and third dorsal interosseous will be attached to the dorsal digital expansion of the middle finger. Coming to the ring finger, the third lumbrical, the third palmar interosseous and the fourth dorsal interosseous. And finally, the little finger, again fourth lumbrical muscle, palmar interosseous, the fourth palmar interosseous, and dorsal interosseous will not be attached to the dorsal digital expansion of the little finger. So this is in general about the composition of the dorsal digital expansion. Okay, coming finally the claw hand, which I have already mentioned. Claw hand is nothing but when these muscles like lumbricals, interosseous, etc. are affected, when there is injury to the ulnar nerve, this complete claw hand is occurring. Actually, for complete claw hand, median nerve also should be involved, because we know the first and second lumbrical is supplied by median nerve. So, if for complete hand, both median nerve and ulnar nerve injury should be there, and there will be just action like this. Just remember the action of lumbricals and metacarpals is this. Okay. Just summarizing about our topic. So, dorsal digital expansion, you should say, is mainly seen over the proximal phalanx, involving the metacarpophalangeal joint. So it's mainly seen on the dorsal aspect of the proximal phalanx as well as the head of the metacarpal bone, a triangular aponeurosis. It has got an apex and a base. The base is seen like a hood, it is seen, and it will be covering this metacarpal head as well as the metacarpophalangeal joint, and it will be attaching to the deep transverse carpal ligament. Then we can say regarding the apex portion close to the distal aspect of the proximal phalanx, it is splitting into 3 slips, central slip and 2 collateral slips. Central slip attaching to the base of the middle phalanx, collateral slips joining with each other, inserting to the base of the distal phalanx. Then the difference between, so the central slip and collateral slips, the differences. Central slip carrying mainly the attachment of extensor digitorum, and collateral slips attachments of the lumbricals and interosseous, etc. Coming to the wing tendons, which are very important. There can be either proximal or distal wing tendons. Proximal is nothing but palmar and dorsal interosseous. Distal wing tendon is nothing but the lumbrical. Then the differences. Composition. So each dorsal digital expansion in each finger will be different based on the attachment of lumbricals, interosseous muscles. And finally, claw hand. What is the aspect of claw? Now we will be answering our questions. I think now it will be very easy for you to answer the questions. Coming to the first question. Okay, I think it was regarding which is the muscle which is inserting via the dorsal digital expansion. Very clear now, it's nothing but extensor digitorum muscle, which is a muscle of the posterior compartment of the forearm. Next question, what is the difference between central and collateral slip? What is the difference? Yes, both are functioning independently. Central slip is mainly carrying the attachment of extensor digitorum. Collateral slips are carrying mainly the attachment of interosseous and lumbricals. Then what else you can see? Central slip is more closely related to central slip acts on the metacarpophalangeal joint, while the collateral slips acts on metacarpophalangeal as well as the both interphalangeal joints. Then we know the central slip is attaching, the insertion is to the base of the middle phalanx, collateral slip joining together, finally attaching to the base of the distal phalanx. So the basic is covered. Coming to the wing tendons, what are the wing tendons? What are the proximal and distal? Already I have discussed. Proximal is nothing but interosseous muscle, distal is nothing but lumbricals muscle. And on another aspect is laterally. Usually the lumbricals will be attaching along the lateral margin of the dorsal digital expansion. Then the other differences, we know the wing tendons, proximal wing tendons will be closely related to the metacarpophalangeal joint, while distal wing tendons closely related to the proximal interphalangeal joint, like that. Then coming to the composition, which I have next the composition of the dorsal digital expansion in case of middle finger. That means which have already middle finger. The lumbricals, the second lumbricals is attached. In case of palmar interosseous, no palmar interosseous is attached. As well as dorsal interosseous, both second and third is attached. So these are the things. Next question was true or false, which is, that means the lumbrical muscle is attaching to the medial aspect of dorsal digital expansion. Is true or false? What is the answer? Yes, it is false because it is attaching to the lateral aspect. We can remember like LL, lumbricals to the lateral aspect. And I think all the questions are covered. So hope you got a clear idea of what is dorsal digital expansion. So just keep in mind this diagram, this triangular area. This is the region of dorsal digital expansion with its diverging slits, with its wing tendons, and an idea about the claw hands. So please give your valuable suggestions, and you can suggest topics which you need more of understanding. So I'm ending with the quote, like always have a hope that your hard work will be rewarded. Thank you.